expected to continue. Globalization is going to lead to an increased divide between a small sector of rich and a large sector of poor, internal to the countries and among countries. And they expect that there will be turbulence and unrest among the growing sectors of people who are harmed by the process of corporate-led globalization, and therefore new military systems are needed to control them. That's the primary reason why the United States, in fact quite open, it's not a secret, you read it in the internal documents, that's the primary reason why the United States is trying to move towards militarization of space, use of space for offensive military actions, which they describe quite frankly as just the next frontier. In the past, countries used armies and navies to protect their commercial interests and investment. They used the Air Force. Now we're going to have to use space, which the U.S. more or less monopolizes, to protect U.S. Commercial interests and investments and access to resources throughout the world, and to control the growing numbers of unruly people around the world. That's official policy. Essentially in those words, if you're interested, you can read it in the high-level documents. So there's a change, and the existence of the Soviet Union imposed a certain restraint on the use of violence. Similarly, the Soviet Union was restricted in the use of violence because of the United States. So during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, for example, they didn't destroy cities. They didn't wipe out, Kandahar, because there was a constraint. The U.S. was a constraining force, and in fact had set up a huge mercenary army there, including primarily radical Islamists, to limit the Soviet Union. The U.S. faces no such constraints anymore, can freely do whatever it likes. And we've seen that immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So when Britain and the United States sent 500,000 men to attack Iraq in 1990, that's something they never would have done if the Soviet Union was still there, because it would have been too dangerous. Now it's not dangerous anymore. So you can attack anyone you like, destroy anyone you like, use any force you like, there are no limits. And for the third world, that's a disaster, and it's recognized to be. It's recognized by the most anti-communist leaders. So Prime Minister Mahathir of Malaysia is strongly anti-communist, but he's described the fall of the Soviet Union as a disaster, precisely because it allows the imperial powers, the United States, Britain, and allies, to do anything they want without constraint. So yes, there are changes, but they're not changes in policy. They're changes in tactics and in ideology. Whatever the West or the U.S. may do to deny it isn't the new war against terror propelled by the ideology of the clash of civilizations. Here I agree with the U.S. government. It has nothing to do with any clash of civilizations. That's propaganda. After the fall of the Soviet Union, it was necessary to invent new pretexts for carrying out the same policies. And one of the pretexts that was invented, in this case in the academic world, was clash of civilizations. So before this, we were fighting communism. Now we're fighting other civilizations, Islam or Confucianism or whatever. And it's total nonsense. I mean, you simply look at the alignments in the world and you'll see that it's complete nonsense. For example, the most fundamentalist Islamic state in the world is Saudi Arabia. It's been a U.S. client since its origins, remains so. The biggest Muslim state in the world is Indonesia, by far. Again, it's been a U.S. favorite ever since the Indonesian generals in 1965 carried out a huge massacre, killed maybe 1 million people, mostly landless peasants, and destroyed the only mass-based political party in the country, the Communist Party, which was the party of the poor. After they achieved that, they became a U.S. favorite. That's the biggest Islamic state in the world. In the 1980s, who did the CIA organize to fight against the Russians? The most extreme radical Islamicists they could find anywhere in North Africa and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. They were the ones who were organized to be a mercenary army to fight the Russians. So, they're not only the allies, they're the creation of the United States, including Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, in the same years, the United States was fighting a war against the Catholic Church. The U.S. war in Central America, which was a violent, murderous war, left hundreds of thousands of people killed, 4 countries in total ruins. A large part of it was fought against the Catholic Church. The 1980s began with the assassination of an archbishop. The decade ended with the assassination of 6 leading Jesuit intellectuals, all by the military and paramilitary forces trained and organized and controlled by the United States. And that was what was happening right through the period. There were also, tens of thousands of peasants and indigenous people and so on who got killed. That's usual. Slaughtered, not just killed. Why was the U.S. fighting the Catholic Church? Well, the Latin American church since the 1960s had changed. For hundreds of years, it had been the church of the rich. But in the 1960s, it shifted and undertook what was called the preferential option for the poor. It would begin to work for the poor. And they did. So priests and nuns were organizing peasant collectives and study groups and helping people try to struggle against injustice and for human rights, and therefore they had to be slaughtered. It happened that they were Catholics, but that didn't matter. In fact, if you just look at the most elementary facts of contemporary history, you can see that the talk of clash of civilization is nonsense. It's a clash of the rich and the powerful against anyone who happens to stand up for their rights and for their freedom and independence against the onslaught of the powerful. They can be black, white, green, Muslims, Catholics, whatever they are. It doesn't make any difference. If they make that wrong decision, they have to be destroyed.